bring up another area you can claim you have no expertise in, and that's the use of humor. We respond to people who use humor in communication, yet it's not taught in grade school. We're not taught how to be comedians, but we respond to it, and that seems to be the case in almost every language.
Well, see, I don't think that has too much to do with language. We can be humorous in other ways too. A clown can be humorous without using language, and nobody teaches a child how to laugh at a clown. Now, I think we're going here to interesting topics, but topics where nothing is understood. There's no doubt in my mind that there's something about human nature, the basic structure of the human mind brain, which makes certain things comical and other things not. Just as there's certain things about the human brain that make some things come out to be a human language and others not, although they could be a Martian language or something. And at its root, it's, I don't think, fundamentally different from the fact that we grow arms and not wings. Now, we don't know why we grow arms and not wings, but you assume that it's got something to do with the human genetic endowment. And I think the comparable assumption is true in all these cases. Part of the fascination of the study of language is that it's one of the few examples where you can really get some insight into how it works. These other topics that you're mentioning, say humor, should be subjected to the same kind of study, but so far it hasn't been clear how to do it.
Words are endlessly fascinating, I think, because it's amazing how somebody can walk in a room, hear a few words, and walk out crying or angry or this whole series of emotions simply with a few words. Doesn't that constantly amaze you?
It's not just words again. It could be a fleeting picture. Take, say, a caricature. You see a few lines, and it brings to your mind a person in a situation, maybe a tragic situation or a comical situation or whatever. I mean, the human mind is a very marvelous thing. It's got an extremely intricate and complex structure, which, at least at a scientific level, we understand very little about. But what you're pointing to is a central part of it. Little hints here and there succeed in evoking in us very rich experience and interpretation. And what's more, it's done surprisingly uniformly for different people, and it's of course done without any training or very minimal training. Nobody would know how to train people to do this. So it somehow must be the only logical possibility, aside from angels or acts of God, is it's something rooted in our nature. I mean, qualitatively speaking, these phenomena are very much like physical growth. The nutrition that's given to an organism, to an embryo, is not what determines that it's going to be a human or a bird. What determines that it's going to be a human or a bird is something about its internal structure. And what determines that we are going to be the kind of creature that can speak and that can interpret a sign or a line, a couple of lines or something as evoking an emotional experience or whatever, that's something in our nature, but it's so far beyond what we know how to study that you can only wave your hands at it at the moment.
How should parents react with respect to exposing their children to language? Should they expose them to all aspects of language, or should they simply let them develop any way they develop?
I suspect there's very little that parents can do to change the course of language development. I mean, we know from experience. Again, let me say, I'm not speaking about this from any expertise. I don't have any more expertise than personal experience. There's nothing in linguistic theory that gives answers to this question. But experience suffices to indicate, in no cases, that you can create an environment in which a 5-year-old will sound like a college professor, and it's kind of comical, but they'll use big words and complicated sentences and so on. I suspect you're probably harming the 5-year-old, but it's possible to do that. Children can be molded. On the other hand, if you just leave them alone, they're going to pick up the language of their culture. Typically, they'll pick up the language of their peers. Quite typically, there are exceptions, but typically children will learn the language they heard in the streets. So take me. My father spoke with a Ukrainian accent, and my mother spoke with a mixed New York Lithuanian accent, and I spoke urban Philadelphia, because that's what the kids were talking in the streets. And undoubtedly, if you really took my speech patterns and so on aside, you'd find influences from the parents and the uncles and so on, but overwhelmingly it's you pick up the peer culture. Why this happens, nobody knows. and how that. But there's something about humans, children, that gets them to grow the language that's roughly that of their peers. And it's a very rich system. It's an extremely rich system. They don't try. They can't prevent themselves from doing it. They can't make it happen. The parents can enrich anyone who has a 2-year-old knows that the kid is running around all over the place trying to find out what the name of everything is. What's that, and you can help them, and you can read the children and show them pictures, and they're all fascinated with it. There are periods of very rapid language growth where you just can't satiate the curiosity fast enough.
Amazingly so.
It's unbelievable, in fact. What actually happens is really astonishing. I mean, there have been, for example, at the peak periods of, forget the structure of language, which is complicated enough, but just take vocabulary acquisition, the simplest part. At peak periods of acquisition of vocabulary, learning new words, children are picking them up at maybe a rate of 1 an hour or something, which means that they're essentially learning a word on one exposure.
And the adults go into adult education and die trying to learn a new language.
Oh yeah, but if you think what it means to learn a word on one exposure, the way to understand how amazing an achievement this is to try to define a word. So suppose you had an organism that wasn't equipped to learn the words of human language, and you really had to teach it those words by training. Well, you'd first have to define a word. What is the meaning of table, for instance? Nobody can do that.
You have to define the definition you're using to define the word.
But you see, what we call definitions are not definitions. They're just hints. If you take the Oxford English Dictionary, the one you read with the magnifying glass, and they give you a long, detailed thing which they call the definition of a word. In fact, it's very far from a definition of a word. It's a few hints that a person who already knows the concept can use to understand what's going on. But remember, the child is picking that up not from the Oxford English Dictionary with its whole array of hints. The child's picking it up from seeing it used once or twice. Now, that can only mean one thing. It can only mean that the concept itself, in all of its richness and complexity, is somehow sitting there, waiting to have a sound associated with it. Now, that can't be quite true, but something very much like that is probably true. That's why you and I will have essentially the same concept of table and the same concept of person and of nation, or all sorts of things. And not complicated things. I mean really simple things like person, for instance, or thing. We'll have that even though we all have very limited experience, because basically we started with those concepts.
We're getting down to the end of the show. Do you ever see a time when the study of language and linguistics will not fascinate you?
Well, I suppose it must come sometime when your mind deteriorates to the point where you can't deal with hard questions. I guess that'll happen.
Professor Noam Chomsky from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a guest lecturer at the University of Washington. Upon reflection.